Omar and I would talk consistently, like multiple times a day. So we knew pretty much where Omar was at all the time. If
the Harbor Patrol opened up the lid and they could see a brown blanket and what was a human hand sticking out from the blanket.
Not all is lost. Fight for what is right and keep fighting for a better tomorrow.
A sealed barrel floating in San Diego Bay holds human remains. 66 stab wounds. A brutality so extreme, investigators struggle to identify the victim. The body has been in the water for weeks. 5 miles away, a woman named Alicia is frantically searching for her younger brother, Omar, who vanished in late September. The people who claimed to help weren't what they seemed. One detail, a single ankle tattoo, would connect these mysteries and expose a calculated horror hiding in plain sight. But this story begins on the night Omar Medina disappeared. Multiple times a day. Without fail, that was the rhythm Omar Medina and his sister Alicia had kept for years. A text in the morning, a call at lunch, another check-in before bed, sometimes more. The phone would buzz, Omar's name would light up the screen, and Alicia would answer before the second ring. For Omar, the youngest of 3 siblings, and Alicia Villegas, the oldest, the contact wasn't a habit, it was a lifeline. They'd grown up in a single-parent home in Chula Vista, California, where the lines between sibling and parent had blurred early. When you grow up with less, you hold tighter to what you have. Alicia had stepped into the role when Omar was still young, part sister, part second mother. The one who'd been there through thick and thin, the one who stayed. Omar knew it. He said it plainly. She's been like my second mother. She's been there through thick and thin. The calls became their constant. The phone would light up. Omar's name. Alicia would answer. Sometimes it was nothing, just where he was, what he was doing, who he was with. Sometimes it was everything, the kind of talk that happens when 2 people know each other's silences as well as their words. The rhythm wasn't about control, it was about presence. About knowing the other person was still there, still okay, still moving through the world. Omar and I would talk consistently, like multiple times a day, Alicia would later recall. So we knew pretty much where Omar was at all the time. That kind of closeness isn't built overnight. It's survived. Year after year of showing up, of checking in, of refusing to let the other disappear into their own life. Omar was 28, still young enough to dream about the family he didn't have yet. He'd talked to Alicia about it, about meeting the right woman someday, about having children of his own. The hope in his voice was real. He could see it, a wife, kids, the kind of stability he'd worked toward his whole life, the kind of future that felt earned. Alicia would laugh and tease him, already imagining the day. I can't wait to be an aunt to your kids and love on them. The future felt close enough to touch. Neither of them had any reason to think a day would come when the calls would stop. But routines, no matter how unbreakable they seem, are only as permanent as the people who keep them. And some people don't get to finish what they started. September 30, 2017 began like any other day. The sun rose over Chula Vista, phones buzzed with the usual rhythm, voices carried through the line. Omar moved through his day the way he always did, seen, accounted for, loved. By evening, the pattern was still holding, the phone still worked, messages still went through. The last one showed as seen. And then, silence. Multiple times a day, without fail until September 30, 2017. After that evening, Omar's phone would show one last message as seen. It would never light up again. The day that would break the pattern started like any other. September 30, 2017 evening, Omar Medina walked into a pharmacy near his home in Chula Vista. Surveillance footage would later show the sequence in ordinary, silent frames. Omar moving through the aisles, stopping to pick up a few items, scanning the shelves with the unhurried focus of someone who has nowhere urgent to be. Nothing rushed, nothing unusual. The cameras captured a man running an errand at the end of a regular day. The kind of moment that gets recorded 1,000 times a day and means nothing until it means everything. He paid for his purchases. The timestamp read evening. The receipt would become one of the last pieces of evidence that Omar had been alive. Moving through the world, still reachable. From the pharmacy, he drove to a nearby fast food restaurant. More footage, more ordinary frames. Omar walking in, ordering dinner, waiting for his meal. The same calm rhythm. No one following him through the parking lot, no visible tension in his movements, no glances over his shoulder. Just a man, picking up food on a Saturday night. The way he probably had 100 times before. The cameras saw what everyone sees 100 times a day, someone going about their life. Ordinary and unremarkable. But surveillance doesn't record what comes next. It only captures the moment before. Omar left the restaurant with his meal in hand. The footage shows him walking out, unhurried, alone. He had no reason to think this night would be different from any other. No reason to believe the phone in his pocket, the one that lit up multiple times a day with Alicia's name, would soon fall silent. He had no idea this was the last errand he would ever run. The drive back to his rental unit was short. Omar lived in a backyard unit behind his landlord's main house, a small space he sublet, quiet and separate from the front property. He'd been there long enough that coming home felt routine. Park the car, walk through the gate, unlock the door, set down the food. Another Saturday night. But something changed after he walked through that door. The phone that had buzzed and lit up multiple times a day, every day, for years, went offline. Not powered down, not out of battery, not in a dead zone, just gone. The signal dropped. The connection severed. The last message still showing as seen on Alicia's screen. And it stayed that way. No calls out, no messages sent, no location pings. The device that had been Omar's constant tether to his sister, to the world, to the rhythm of his life that had held for 28 years, went dark. By morning, the silence would register with someone else. That night, after Omar returned to the backyard rental unit he sublet from his landlord, his phone went offline. It would never make another sound. By morning, the silence would have a second witness. By morning, that silence had found someone else. Alicia Villegas stared at her phone screen. The message she'd sent Omar was marked seen, but no reply had come. It started the way these things always start, ordinary and small. Omar was supposed to show up that evening, September 30th. He didn't. Alicia waited, checked the time, waited longer. Then she sent a message, the kind of check-in they'd been doing for years. Where are you? What's going on? Call me back. The message went through. Then a moment later, the status changed, seen. I'm like, okay. Where's he at? Alicia would later recall. So I sent him a message and I saw that in Messenger that he received it. Omar had read it. The little blue checkmark proved it. That meant his phone was on. That meant he was somewhere with signal. Somewhere he could see her words on his screen. That meant he was fine, just busy, distracted. Maybe caught up with a friend or running later than expected. Alicia knew how to talk herself out of worry. She'd done it before. Dead battery. Lost track of time. Fell asleep early. got pulled into a conversation and forgot to check his phone. 1,000 small reasons that explain why someone doesn't text back right away. So I'm like, okay, his phone's on. He received my message. He'll answer me later. Later turned into hours. The phone screen stayed the same. Seen. No typing indicator, no response, no explanation. The night stretched on, and the silence stretched with it. But silence isn't proof of anything, not yet. People get busy, people fall asleep, people forget to hit send. This is the specific, ordinary way a family starts to realize something is wrong. Not a scream, just a message that stays seen. Alicia went to bed. She told herself it was nothing. She woke up the next morning, October 1, and reached for her phone before she was fully awake. Still nothing. Still seen. Still no explanation. The worry she'd pushed down the night before started creeping back, harder to dismiss in daylight. Hours had passed now. Omar didn't go 12 hours without contact. Not with her. And then her phone rang. The next morning. Alicia's mother called, asking if she had heard from Omar. "Have you spoken with Omar?" The question hit differently coming from someone else. It wasn't just Alicia wondering anymore. It wasn't just one person who couldn't reach him. When two people who talk to Omar every day, two people who've built their lives around knowing where he is, checking in, stay close both end, up staring at unanswered messages. The silence stops being easy to explain away. Alicia hadn't heard from him. Her mother hadn't either. And that pattern, the daily calls, the constant contact, the rhythm they'd all kept for years, had broken for both of them at the same time. The same night. The same silence. That's when it stopped feeling like a dead battery or a forgotten text. When Alicia's mother called the next morning asking about Omar, the silence stopped feeling like nothing. By morning, the silence had a second witness, and it no longer felt like nothing. Alicia knew exactly who to call next. Omar's landlord, Timothy Cook. Alicia dialed Timothy Cook, the landlord who rented Omar the backyard unit behind his house. The phone rang. Cook picked up. Alicia didn't waste time. "Have you seen Omar? Do you know where he might be?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Timothy Cook answered. He'd been drinking the night before. He didn't seem to be in a good headspace. Alicia listened. Cook's voice was steady, matter of fact. He was telling her what he'd observed, what any landlord might notice about a tenant. Omar had been drinking. He seemed off. Nothing alarming on its own, just the kind of detail that explains why someone might not be reachable for a day or two. "That was the last I saw of him," Cook added. The last he saw of him. The words landed with a kind of finality, as if that was the end of the story. Omar had been drinking. He'd been in a bad headspace. And then he'd left. Where he went after that, Cook couldn't say. Alicia had no reason yet to question him. Timothy Cook was Omar's landlord. Nothing more. A man who rented him space. Who lived in the main house while Omar occupied the smaller unit out back. They weren't close. They weren't friends. Just landlord and tenant. If Cook said he'd seen Omar drinking and out of sorts, why would Alicia doubt it? But something about the story didn't sit right with what she knew of her brother. Omar wasn't a heavy drinker. He wasn't someone who spiraled into bad headspaces and disappeared without telling anyone. And even if he had been drinking, even if he had been struggling with something, Omar would have called, he would have texted, he would have let someone know where he was going, what he was doing, when he'd be back. That was who Omar was. That was the rhythm they'd kept for years. Alicia had no reason yet to disbelieve him, but something about the story didn't sit right with what she knew of her brother. Still, what could she say? Cook had given her an answer. Omar had been there, he'd been drinking, he'd seemed off, and then he'd left. That was all Cook knew, or at least, that was all he was saying. The call ended. Alicia hung up. She was no closer to finding Omar than she had been before. No closer to understanding where he'd gone or why he wasn't answering. Cook's explanation filled in a piece of the timeline. The night of September 30th, Omar had been at the rental unit, drinking, not himself. But it didn't explain the silence that followed. It didn't explain why his phone had gone dark, why the messages stayed unread, why the rhythm that had held for years had suddenly, completely stopped. And it didn't explain the feeling growing in Alicia's chest, the sense that something was wrong in a way she couldn't yet name. It was the first lie Timothy Cook would tell her. It would not be the last. But without proof that something had happened to Omar, Alicia would have to find another way to make someone listen. Alicia walked into the police station with everything she knew. Omar hadn't responded in days. His landlord's story didn't add up, and her brother would never just leave. She sat across from an officer and laid it out. The calls that had come every day for years had stopped. The message marked seen with no reply. The landlord, who said Omar had been drinking and in a bad headspace, except Omar wasn't like that. My brother is missing. He hasn't answered calls or messages in days. Something is wrong. The officer listened, took notes. But something in her expression told Alicia that what came next wasn't going to be what she needed to hear. The officer explained the policy. Adults over 18 are legally allowed to make their own choices about where they go and whether they stay in contact. Unless there's a medical condition, a documented reason to believe the person is incapable of caring for themselves, the department doesn't open a missing person investigation. If somebody is over the age of 18, and unless they have a medical condition, they will not go look for them. The words landed like a door closing. Omar was 28. No documented medical condition. As far as the system was concerned, he had every right to stop answering his phone and walk away. The policy didn't account for the fact that some people would never do that. It didn't account for years of daily calls, the rhythm that had never broken until now. That's what I was told, Alicia would later recall. The gap between policy and reality opened wide in that moment. The system had a rule. The rule made sense on paper. Adults have autonomy. Not every estranged family member deserves a police investigation, but the rule couldn't see Omar. It couldn't see the unbroken pattern now shattered. Alicia understood then what she was up against. No one was coming to help. No badge would be assigned. No investigator would pull phone records or interview Timothy Cook. The system had decided this wasn't a case at all. If Omar was going to be found, she would have to be the one to find him. She had no badge, no authority, no access to the tools the police had. She couldn't compel anyone to answer questions or force Cook to tell the truth. But she had something the system didn't. She knew Omar. She knew the rhythm they'd kept. She knew that if he could call, he would have called. Whatever had happened to him, wherever he was. The silence wasn't his choice. If Omar was going to be found, Alicia would have to be the one to find him. She had no badge, no authority, no access to surveillance footage or phone records. But she had something the system didn't. She knew her brother would never just walk away. Alicia started with the hospitals, every emergency room within 20 miles of Chula Vista. The calls followed the same pattern. She'd give Omar's name, ask if he'd been admitted, if anyone matching his description had come through in the past few days. Wait for the typing on the other end. Wait for the database search. The answer came back the same every time. I'm looking for my brother, Omar Medina. Has he been admitted? A pause. The sound of typing, then the reply. No record of that name. She moved through the list methodically. One hospital after another, then the jails, Same question, different department. Had Omar been arrested, booked, held overnight, the system could track people when it wanted to, when someone was in custody. There was paperwork, a record, a trail, numbers and names in a database that proved a person had been somewhere, had been seen, had existed in the eyes of the law. Nothing. She called friends, family, people who knew Omar, who might have heard from him, who might have seen him in passing somewhere between September 30th and now. Had anyone talked to him, gotten a message, seen him at a gas station or a store or just walking down the street? The kind of ordinary sighting that means nothing until someone goes missing. No one had. Every lead closed the same way, nothing. The absence itself was becoming its own kind of evidence. Alicia requested Omar's phone records from the carrier. If the phone was still on somewhere, if it had pinged a tower or sent a text or made a call, the carrier would have a record of it. The data would show where he'd been, who he'd contacted, whether the device was still active. Phone companies track everything, every ping, every connection. Every second a device touches the network. The records came back. One line stood out above everything else. The phone has shown no activity since September 30. No calls, no texts, no data usage. The device that had been Omar's constant connection to the world, the one that buzzed multiple times a day with Alicia's messages, the one that had kept them tethered to each other for years, had gone completely dark. September 30. The same day Omar had walked into that pharmacy, picked up food at the restaurant, driven back to the rental unit behind Timothy Cook's house. The same day the landlord claimed he'd last seen Omar drinking and in a bad headspace. The same day the phone had shown that final message as seen. After that silence, the phone records didn't lie. Whatever had happened to Omar, wherever he'd gone, his phone hadn't gone with him. Or if it had been turned off, powered down, destroyed. Removed from the network in a way that left no digital trace, no breadcrumbs, no last known location. Just a timestamp that marked the exact moment Omar's connection to the world had been severed. The phone had gone silent on September 30, and it would never make another sound. If Omar's phone couldn't tell her where he'd gone, Alicia would have to look for something that could. Alicia gathered friends and divided the blocks around Omar's last known address into a grid. If the phone couldn't tell her where he'd gone, maybe the streets could. Maybe someone had seen him. Maybe his car was parked somewhere nearby, tucked on a side street or in a lot they hadn't checked yet. Maybe there was a trace, a receipt, a witness, something physical the digital trail had missed. We'll cover every block within a mile radius, Alicia told the group. They split up. Each person took a section. They walked the sidewalks, checked alleys, scanned parking lots for Omar's car. They knocked on doors, asked neighbors if they'd seen him, showed photos, asked if anyone remembered seeing a man matching his description in the past week. If they'd noticed anything unusual, a car left overnight, someone who looked out of place, anything that broke the pattern of an ordinary residential neighborhood. Day after day they walked. The grid tightened. They covered one block, then the next, then the next. The work was methodical, exhausting, and so far empty. Nothing on this side either. The reports came back the same. No car, no sightings, no one who remembered seeing Omar since the end of September. The neighborhood was residential, quiet. People kept to themselves. Even if Omar had been there, even if he'd walked past someone's window or driven down their street, they might not have noticed. Or they'd noticed and forgotten. Memory is selective, especially when nothing seems wrong at the time. They checked apartment buildings, storage units, side streets that didn't see much traffic. corners where a car could sit for days without anyone paying attention. Has anyone in this building seen him? No, no one had. The days stretched on. Each search ended the same way, nothing found, no leads opened, no answers gained. The exhaustion set in, not from the walking, but from the repetition. The same questions asked 100 different ways, the same empty answers. The same slow realization that Omar had vanished so completely that even a coordinated search of the neighborhood where he'd last been seen couldn't turn up a single clue. They were looking in the right place the whole time. The answer was blocks away, but it takes days of searching before anyone finds it. Alicia kept the search going. She had to. The police weren't looking, the phone records had led nowhere, the hospitals and jails had no record. This was all she had left: feet on the ground, eyes on the streets, friends willing to spend their days walking grid patterns in the hope that something, anything, would appear. But days passed, and the grid kept expanding without result. They were close, closer than they knew. Walking streets that ran parallel to the one they needed, check buildings on blocks adjacent to the answer. The search radius included the right area, it just hadn't hit the exact spot yet. One more block, one more turn, one more day. They were searching in the right neighborhood all along. They just hadn't found the right block yet. October 7, 2017, 8 days after Omar disappeared, Alicia's phone rang with the call she'd been waiting for. I get a call. Hey, we found your brother's car. You need to come down here. Like, right now. One of the search party members. A few blocks they hadn't covered yet. The right block. Alicia drove straight there. The location was close, so close it felt impossible they'd missed it until now. But the grid had been wide, and Omar's car had been parked on a residential street that looked like every other residential street in the neighborhood. Easy to overlook when you're searching block by block, day after day, and nothing stands out. It was only like 2-3 blocks away from where Omar lived. 3 blocks. Omar's car had been sitting there the entire time they'd been searching. Days of walking grid patterns, asking neighbors, checking alleys, and the answer had been blocks away, parked on a street corner in plain sight. Alicia approached the car. Unlocked. The doors opened without resistance. And inside, all his stuff is in the car. Everything Omar owned. Computers, guitars, nice clothing folded and stacked in the back seat, personal belongings packed like someone getting ready to move. The belongings were visible through the windows. Anyone walking past could have seen them. In a neighborhood like this, a car left unlocked with valuables inside didn't stay untouched for long. But Omar's car had been sitting there for 8 days, packed full, and no one had taken anything. For a moment, this feels like the answer, but a car full of his things left unlocked in a rough spot raises more questions than it resolves. Alicia stood there looking at the contents of the car. If Omar had packed up to leave somewhere, this was everything he would have taken with him. His work equipment, his instruments. The things that mattered. The things a person doesn't leave behind unless something stops them. But the car was here, abandoned, unlocked, and Omar was nowhere. If he'd driven here himself, where had he gone after parking? If someone else had driven the car here, why leave it unlocked with thousands of dollars worth of belongings visible inside? Why park it 3 blocks from his home and just walk away? Why pack everything so carefully and then abandon it all? The car should have been a breakthrough. It was physical evidence, a concrete location, proof that Omar had been somewhere on a specific street at some point after September 30th. But it didn't explain where he'd gone. It didn't explain why his phone had stopped working. It didn't explain why a man who'd been in daily contact with his family for years had vanished without a word. If anything, the car made the silence worse. It proved Omar had been preparing for something, packing, organizing, getting ready to go somewhere. And then the trail just stopped. If Omar had left on his own, he had left everything he owned behind to do it. Alicia called 911 finally. The police agreed there was enough evidence to take a closer look. Officers from the Chula Vista Police Department walked up to Timothy Cook's front door. Body cameras.
It's only 4 blocks from where the car was seemingly abandoned. She believes that there has to be a clue somewhere in the house.
I asked the officer if she could please go to the house and see if they could find any indication.
Recording. Alicia had called 911 with enough evidence to finally warrant a look at Omar's car. Abandoned and packed with everything he owned, his phone silent for over a week, his family unable to reach him, and Timothy Cook, the landlord, who'd told Alicia that Omar had been drinking and in a bad headspace the last time he saw him. The officers knocked. Cook answered. He was calm, cooperative. When they asked to see the rental unit Omar had been subletting, he didn't hesitate. "Can we take a look at Omar's room? It's out back. I'll show you." Cook led them through the main house and out to the backyard. The rental unit sat behind the main property, a small structure, separate and private. The kind of space a tenant could come and go from without the landlord noticing. The officers followed Cook to the door. He opened it, and inside, nothing. The room had been stripped to the studs. Drywall removed from the walls, leaving bare wooden framing exposed. Flooring torn out. Water pooled on the ground, as if someone had hosed the space down. There was no bed, no furniture, no personal belongings, no trace that anyone had lived there at all. The officers stood in the doorway, looking at what should have been Omar's room. This wasn't a room in the process of being renovated. This was a room that had been erased. Without a warrant, the police can look but cannot search. Further, they leave with more questions than answers. And the audience is left staring at a room that has clearly been erased on purpose. Cook stood nearby, watching them take it in. He didn't explain why the room had been gutted. He didn't offer a reason for the water on the floor or the missing drywall. He just stood there, cooperative and calm, as if there was nothing unusual about a rental unit being stripped down to bare studs days after the tenant disappeared. The officers asked questions. When had Omar moved out? Where had his belongings gone? Why had the room been torn apart? Cook's answers were vague. Cooperative enough not to raise immediate suspicion, but thin enough that they didn't actually explain anything. "Without a warrant, we can't search any further," one of the officers finally said. They couldn't compel Cook to answer. They couldn't search the rest of the property. Without a warrant. All they could do was look at what Cook was willing to show them, and what he was showing them was a room with nothing in it. The body cameras recorded everything. Cook walking them through the property, the gutted room, the pooled water, the bare studs, the complete absence of any sign that Omar Medina had ever been there. There was nothing left of Omar in that room, and that itself was the evidence. The body cam footage captured Cook walking them through the property, cooperative and calm. But Alicia wasn't done looking. Alicia went back to Omar's car and started pulling everything out, piece by piece. The police had seen the gutted room and left without answers. The body cam footage had captured Cook's calm cooperation, but no warrant had been issued. If there was going to be a lead, Alicia would have to find it herself. She opened the back seat and began. Computers, guitars, clothing folded and stacked, papers. Personal belongings Omar had packed like he was getting ready to go somewhere. She went through each item methodically, looking for anything, a note, a receipt, a scrap of paper that might tell her where he'd been or where he'd been planning to go. At the bottom of one of the bags, she found them. 2 receipts, one from a pharmacy, one from a fast food restaurant, both dated September 30, 2017. The last day anyone had heard from Omar. The day his phone had gone silent. The day the landlord claimed he'd last seen him drinking and in a bad headspace. These receipts were time-stamped. They were proof Omar had been at specific locations on that day, and if he'd been at those locations, there would be cameras. Surveillance footage. Digital proof of where he'd gone, what he'd done, whether anyone had been with him. This is the moment Alicia stops waiting for the system to act and hands investigators something they can actually use. I took the receipts to the police station. Alicia walked into the station with the 2 slips of paper and asked to speak to someone working on Omar's case. A detective sat down across from her. She laid the receipts on the table. These are the last places that my brother was at. You could go and get the surveillance footage. The detective listened as Alicia explained that the receipts were the last documented places Omar had been. The pharmacy and the restaurant were both in Chula Vista, both within a few miles of where Omar's car had been found. If the police pulled the footage from September 30, they'd see Omar. They'd see what time he was there. They'd see if he was alone or with someone. They'd have a timeline. It was the first concrete lead in a case that had so far been built on absence, missing phone activity. The receipts were small, but they were real. They were something. We finally found something. The receipts gave investigators a starting point, a place to look, a reason to pull surveillance footage and start building a timeline of Omar's last known movements. Alicia had done what the police hadn't, yet she'd found evidence that could move the case forward. She took the receipts to the police station herself. It was the first real thread anyone had pulled. 5 miles away, in San Diego Bay, something else was about to surface. October 12, 2017. 12 days after Omar Medina disappeared, a marine worker in San Diego Bay spotted something floating in the water. 5 miles from where Alicia had been searching, something else was rising to the surface. The marine worker was going through his usual routine in San Diego Bay when he spotted the barrel. Large, metal, floating near the surface where it shouldn't be. He steered his boat closer to get a better look. A steel barrel, industrial-sized, and it wasn't just floating, it had been modified. Steel cables had been drilled into the base, cinder blocks attached to the cables hanging beneath the barrel like weights. Heavy blocks meant to pull it down. The kind of setup someone builds when they want something to stay at the bottom of the bay. Permanently. Out of sight. Forgotten. But it wasn't at the bottom. It was floating. The marine worker pulled out his radio. "Harbour police. We've got something out here you need to see." He described the location, gave the coordinates, told them what he was looking at. Metal barrel, weighted down with cinder blocks, but it's floating. That alone was enough to raise questions. A barrel weighted with cinder blocks doesn't end up in the water by accident. Someone had gone to significant effort to make sure it sank. They drilled holes into the steel, attached cables, secured heavy blocks to pull it under and keep it there. That level of preparation wasn't casual, it was deliberate. And yet here it was, bobbing on the surface, visible to anyone passing by. Could be a navigation hazard. That was the official reason for the call. A floating barrel posed a risk to other boats, something that could damage a hull if a vessel hit it at the wrong angle. But the real concern was obvious. Whatever was inside that barrel, someone had tried very hard to make sure it stayed hidden. The killer built this to disappear forever. It is floating in plain sight instead. The harbour police responded to the marine worker's report about a potential navigation hazard. They dispatched a boat to the coordinates he'd given. When they arrived, they saw exactly what the marine worker had described, a steel barrel weighted with cinder blocks, floating in open water where it had no business being. It should have been at the bottom of the bay. The weight alone, multiple cinder blocks attached to steel cables, should have been more than enough to keep it submerged. Whoever had sunk it had clearly understood the mechanics. They'd built the system to hold. But something had gone wrong with the plan. Decomposition gases building up inside. Maybe. Or improper sealing that let air pockets form. Or just the unpredictability of physics and water pressure working against the design. Whatever the reason, the barrel had risen, and now it sat there, in plain sight, waiting to be opened. Whoever sank that barrel never meant for it to be found. When the harbour police arrived and pulled it from the water, they would discover exactly why. An officer in a hazmat suit carefully began prying open the sealed barrel as the harbour patrol vessel rocked gently on the water. The barrel had been hoisted onto the deck. Heavy. Sealed. Modified with cables and cinder blocks that should have kept it at the bottom of the bay forever. But now it sat in the open air, waiting to reveal what someone had worked so hard to hide. The officer worked the lid carefully. The seal had been tight, deliberate. Whoever closed this barrel hadn't wanted it opened, not by accident, not ever. The lid came free. The officer looked inside and stopped. The harbour patrol opened up the lid, and they could see a brown blanket and what was a human hand sticking out from the blanket. Inside the barrel was a body wrapped in a brown blanket. A hand visible. Someone had been murdered. The officer stepped back. The rest of the crew moved in closer, looking at what had just surfaced after 12 days underwater. A body. Wrapped, weighted, sunk. The kind of disposal that takes planning. The kind of effort that suggests someone believed this would never be found. We have a body. The words shifted everything. What had started as a navigation hazard report was now a homicide investigation. The barrel wasn't debris. It was a crime scene. And whoever was inside had been put there by someone who understood that bodies don't just disappear, they have to be hidden. The brown blanket obscured most of the remains. Only the hand was visible, pale and waterlogged. No identification, no jewelry, no way to know yet who this person had been or how long they'd been in the water. No name yet attaches to the body, only the fact of what was done to it. This is a homicide. The case would now move through the system differently. Harbour Patrol would hand it over to homicide detectives. The barrel would be transported to the medical examiner's office. The body would be autopsied. Cause of death would be determined. And somewhere in that process, investigators would try to figure out who this person was and who had put them in a barrel and dropped them into San Diego Bay. But standing on the deck of the harbour patrol vessel, looking at a hand sticking out from a brown blanket, none of that had happened yet. There was only the barrel, the body, and the weight of what it meant. Someone had drilled cables into the base of a steel barrel, attached cinder blocks, wrapped a body in a blanket, sealed the lid, transported it to the bay, sunk it in open water. Every step deliberate, every choice calculated, the kind of disposal that isn't improvised in a moment of panic, it's planned. There was no way yet to know whose body this was, but it was clear someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one ever would. The answer would come from the medical examiner's office, from a detail the ocean couldn't erase. At the medical examiner's office, the autopsy began on the body pulled from San Diego Bay. The medical examiner conducted the autopsy on the body recovered from the barrel. 12 days in salt water had done damage. The ocean had accelerated decomposition, washing away evidence that might have made identification immediate. But the cause of death was unmistakable. 66 stab wounds. This was personal. The wounds covered the victim's face, neck, and back. 66 times, someone had driven a blade into this person. This wasn't a killing that happened in a single moment. This was sustained, deliberate. But without identification, the brutality was just a fact without a name. The body had been wrapped, weighted, and dropped into the bay. Whoever had done this had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure the victims stayed hidden. Then the medical examiner noticed something. There's a tattoo here, small, on the ankle. The medical examiner found one detail the ocean couldn't erase, a small tattoo on the victim's ankle. Water could degrade skin. It could wash away fingerprints and distort faces. But ink embedded in the dermis stayed. The tattoo was small, but it was clear. A permanent marker now. The only thing that could give this body back its name. Before we reveal whose tattoo matches, comment A if you think the family should be told immediately, or B if investigators should confirm more details first and add one reason why, 5 to 10 words. Please note the next part includes some recreated emotional details to convey the impact of identification. The core truth remains. Investigators began reaching out to families of missing persons, asking about distinguishing marks. They had a body. They had a tattoo. Now they needed to find someone who'd reported a missing person with the exact same mark. For investigators, the tattoo closes one question, whose body this is. For Alicia, it opens the one she has been dreading since September 30. The call came. Does your brother have any tattoos? Any distinguishing marks? Alicia's breath caught. She knew what the question meant. Yes, a small one on his ankle. The officer's voice stayed steady, professional. We need you to confirm the exact location and description, she told them. The placement, the design, the exact details of the tattoo Omar had gotten years ago. And when she finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line. The kind of pause that comes before someone delivers news that will break a family apart. Alicia confirmed Omar had the exact same tattoo. The body in the barrel was her brother. We really had to work backwards and figure out what happened to Omar. Omar's case was no longer a disappearance. It was a murder, and Alicia's brother was the victim. The same kind of unremovable detail that identified Omar would soon identify his killer. Investigators pulled security footage from every camera covering the Chula Vista marina and the bay. They had a victim. They had a barrel. They had a body that had been dumped in San Diego Bay. Now they needed to find out who had put it there. The footage showed boats coming and going, trailers backing down ramps, vehicles pulling in and out of parking lots, days of ordinary marina traffic. And then, on October 11, one day before the barrel surfaced, something stood out. A green Ford F-150 towing a small boat to the marina jetty. That boat doesn't belong in salt water. The boat was a freshwater model. The kind designed for lakes and rivers, not the saltwater Pacific. But there it was, being backed down the ramp at a saltwater marina, launched into the bay. The investigators kept watching. The boat headed out into open water, and when it did, something about it looked wrong. Look at how much lower it's sitting when it goes out. The boat sat noticeably lower in the water, weighted down, carrying something heavy, something that pulled the hull deeper than it should have been for a vessel that size. Less than an hour later, the boat returned. Under an hour, not long enough for fishing. And when it came back, it was sitting significantly higher in the water. Whatever had weighed it down was gone. The boat returned, sitting noticeably higher in the water. Something heavy had been dumped in the bay. The investigators traced the truck forward. Cameras along the highway, gas stations, convenience stores, anywhere the green F-150 might have stopped after leaving the marina. They found it at a gas station. The driver pulled in, parked at the pump, got out of the truck. He walked toward the convenience store, casual and unhurried, as if he'd just come back from an ordinary day on the water. And then, one of the investigators saw it. Zoom in on his leg, that tattoo, there. Clearly visible on the back of the driver's leg was a distinctive tattoo, not large, but unmistakable. Investigators recognized the tattoo before they recognized the man. It's the same one from the body cam footage at the rental unit weeks earlier. We've seen that before. The investigators had seen that tattoo once before, on body cam footage weeks earlier. When they'd walked through Timothy Cook's property and he'd cooperatively shown them to the backyard rental unit where Omar had lived, the one that had been gutted down to the studs. Cook had been wearing shorts that day. The camera had captured him walking them through the house, out to the backyard, standing in the doorway of the stripped room. And there, on the back of his leg, had been the same tattoo. Same placement, same design. That's Cook. The tattoo on the gas station footage matched the one from the body cam Timothy Cook had disposed of the barrel. It was the same tattoo they'd seen once before, on the leg of the man who had let them into Omar's empty room. The tattoo Cook could never remove was the exact detail that connected the barrel, the boat, and the man who lied to Alicia's face. Outside Timothy Cook's residence, an unmarked police vehicle settled into position with a clear view of the driveway. The surveillance team began round-the-clock monitoring of Timothy Cook's residence. He was the primary suspect now. The tattoo had connected him to the barrel, the boat, the disposal. The same man who'd shown police through Omar's gutted room, who'd told Alicia that her brother had been drinking and in a bad headspace, had been the one to wrap Omar's body, weight it down, and drop it into the bay. Now they watched, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for him to do something that would give them probable cause to move in. Cook came out of the house mid-morning, casual, unhurried. He walked to the garage and came back with trash bags, large, black ones, the kind people use for yard work or moving. Inside the surveillance vehicle, the team took note. Subject is loading multiple trash bags into his vehicle. Cook opened the back of his vehicle and started loading the bags in, one by one. Methodical, no rush. He moved like someone cleaning out a garage or getting rid of clutter. Ordinary, unremarkable. Just a man tidying up on an ordinary day. But the surveillance team knew better. They'd seen the footage. They'd matched the tattoo. They knew what Cook had done. And now they were watching him pack away what might be the last pieces of evidence tying him to a murder. He's taking his time. Thinks he has all the time in the world. And he did think that. Cook had no reason to believe he was under suspicion. The police had come to his house weeks ago, looked at the gutted room, and left. He'd been cooperative, calm. He'd answered their questions and shown them around like a landlord trying to help. As far as he knew, the investigation had moved on. Cook believes he is simply tidying up. He has no idea he is being watched, packing away the last of the evidence. Keep the cameras rolling. The surveillance team documented everything. Every bag Cook loaded, every trip he made from the house to the vehicle, every movement was recorded, time-stamped, logged. If this went to trial, the prosecution would need a record of what Cook had been doing in the days after investigators identified him as a suspect. Cook finished loading the bags. He stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the back of his vehicle, as if checking to make sure everything was secure. Then he closed the hatch, walked back to the driver's side, and got in. The engine started. Inside the surveillance vehicle, the team prepared to follow. Cook thought he was cleaning up loose ends. He didn't know he was being watched do it. When Cook's vehicle pulled out of the driveway, the surveillance team followed at a careful distance. Moments after Timothy Cook's vehicle pulled onto the road, police lights flared behind him. The surveillance team had followed at a careful distance, watching Cook drive away from his residence with the trash bags loaded in the back. Now it was time to stop waiting. The officers initiated a traffic stop on Timothy Cook's vehicle and requested consent to search. They tailed him for several blocks before activating their lights. Nothing unusual about the stop from Cook's perspective, just routine. A minor traffic violation, something that happens to anyone. Cook pulled over. The officers approached. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Cook complied. Calm, cooperative, the same demeanor he'd shown weeks earlier when police had come to his house asking about Omar. He had no reason to think this was anything other than a standard traffic stop. The officers asked the question, "Do you consent to a search of your vehicle?" Cook said yes. There are moments in an investigation when a suspect's cooperation works against them. This was one of them. If Cook had refused the search, the officers would have needed a warrant. They would have had to justify probable cause, document their reasoning, wait for a judge to sign off. But Cook didn't refuse. He consented. And the moment he did, the officers opened the back of his vehicle and began going through the trash bags. Wet rags, random pieces of clothing, items that didn't belong together, the kind of assortment that doesn't make sense unless someone is trying to get rid of evidence. No single item was incriminating on its own, but together the collection told a story. And then there was the smell. There's a strong smell of bleach coming from these bags. Bleach. Distinct. Unmistakable, permeating everything inside the vehicle, the kind of smell that doesn't come from cleaning a bathroom or doing laundry. This was the smell of someone trying to erase something. Blood, DNA, forensic evidence. The smell alone tells investigators what they're looking at before a single test comes back. Bleach destroys biological evidence. It breaks down proteins. It makes it nearly impossible to get a clean DNA sample from fabric or surfaces. Someone who knows that might use bleach to wipe down a crime scene, to soak rags, to clean tools, to make sure nothing could be traced back to them. Cook had gutted Omar's room down to the studs. He'd wrapped the body in a blanket, weighted it with cinder blocks, and dropped it into the bay. He'd driven to a gas station and filled up his truck after dumping the barrel. And now, weeks later, he was driving around with bags full of bleach-soaked rags and clothing. The bleach told them everything the room already had before a single test came back. Police seized the contents of Cook's vehicle, collecting as much evidence as possible. What they would find in the truck and on Cook's computer would paint the full picture of what happened to Omar. In the investigation offices, evidence from Timothy Cook's vehicle and residence was laid out piece by piece. The green pickup truck had been seized and processed. Forensic teams had combed through every surface, every corner, every hidden compartment. What they found told a story Cook had tried to erase. The truck bed still held items that belonged to Omar. Clothes, personal documents, a jacket Alicia would have recognized. Things Cook hadn't bothered to dispose of, or hadn't had time to. Things that placed him in possession of a dead man's belongings weeks after that man disappeared. But it was the computer that revealed motive. Investigators opened Cook's laptop and found files containing Omar's full banking details, account numbers, routing numbers, social security number, everything needed to access another person's financial life. He had Omar's full banking details, one investigator said, scrolling through the documents. Social security number. Everything. This wasn't just a landlord-tenant dispute. This was access, opportunity, a man who could become someone else with a few keystrokes. Then the background check came back. Timothy Cook had served 17 years in state prison for attempted murder. Cook served 17 years for attempted murder, the lead detective said quietly. This wasn't his first time. 17 years. Released, relocated, renting out rooms in Chula Vista. And now, standing over another body. Investigators began reconstructing September 30. Omar had returned home that evening after a night out. Cook was waiting. What happened in that room lasted long enough to leave 66 stab wounds, long enough for rage or panic or something darker to play out in full. Afterward, Cook had stripped the room to the studs. Bleach, paint, new drywall, a space scrubbed so thoroughly it no longer resembled the place where a man had died. The next morning, he'd enlisted a friend with access to a boat and dumped the barrel in San Diego Bay before dawn. For Alicia, this is the moment every piece she gathered, the receipts, the questions, the refusal to stop, finally has an answer. For investigators, it's the moment motive, method, and opportunity converge into certainty. Bank records showed a suspicious deposit made from an ATM near the house on the evening of September 30th. Someone had used Omar's card. Someone who knew the PIN. Someone who was still in the house when Omar's body was cooling in a barrel. The timeline was airtight. The evidence was overwhelming. They knew, without doubt, that they had the right man. But here's the irony that closed the case. Timothy Cook had stripped a room down to bare wood. He'd bleached every surface. He'd dumped a body in the ocean and driven Omar's car and posted from Omar's phone and attended his vigil with a straight face. He'd thought of everything, except the one thing he couldn't wash off. The tattoo on his ankle. The same tattoo visible on body camera footage. The same tattoo caught on gas station security tapes was the thread investigators pulled until the entire cover-up unraveled. The evidence was overwhelming, the lead detective said. Timothy Cook was about to be arrested for the murder of Omar Medina. Alicia's phone rang early that morning with the call she'd been waiting for since September 30th. She answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, almost matter-of-fact. "We've made an arrest. It's Timothy Cook." Alicia's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The detective on the line continued details about the arrest, the charges, what would happen next, but the words blurred. All she could hear was the confirmation she'd fought for. "We have him." Later, when she tried to describe that moment, the only words that came were simple, "I remember getting a call that they had made an arrest that morning and that it was Tim. And I just remember sobbing." Not tears of joy. Not relief in the way people imagine. This was release, the kind that comes after holding your breath so long your lungs burn. The kind that doesn't erase the weight, just shifts it from uncertainty to certainty. Timothy Cook was in custody. The man who had lived in Omar's house, driven Omar's car, posted from Omar's phone, attended Omar's vigil with a straight face, he was no longer free. The man whose ankle tattoo had closed the case, who had stripped a room to bare.
I'm like, okay, where's he at? So I sent him a message, and I saw that in Messenger that he received it.
For weeks, Alicia had been told to wait, to trust the process, to let investigators do their job. She had, but she'd also done her own. The receipts she'd gathered, the questions she'd asked, the refusal to stop when others suggested it was time to grieve quietly, all of it had been building toward this. But here's what the arrest didn't change. Omar was still gone. The weeks of searching couldn't be undone. The horror of learning he'd been murdered, that his body had been sealed in a barrel and thrown into the ocean that was still real. The grief didn't lift because the man responsible was in custody. Weeks of being told to wait end in a single phone call she will never forget. Accountability and closure are not the same thing. One is a legal process, arrest, trial, sentencing. The other is emotional, often elusive. Alicia had the first now. The second was still somewhere ahead. If it existed at all. She called her family, told them the news, heard the same mix in their voices: relief, anger that it had taken this long, grief that Omar was still gone, exhaustion from weeks of pressure finally releasing. The arrest made headlines. Local news ran stories about the landlord who killed his tenant, the barrel in San Diego Bay, the vigil attended by the killer. Neighbors were interviewed. Friends who'd received messages from Omar realized they'd been talking to his killer. Private grief became public record. But the story wasn't over. The arrest was essential, hard-won, but it wasn't the ending. It was the call she'd been waiting for since September 30. And it changed nothing about what she'd already lost. But it meant the person responsible would be held accountable. The courtroom was next. And when the day came, Timothy Cook stood before the judge for sentencing in the murder of Omar Medina. The verdict had already been delivered. The jury had heard the evidence: the barrel, the bleached room, the computer with Omar's banking details, the ankle tattoo visible on body camera footage and gas station tapes. They'd heard about the 17 years Cook served for attempted murder. They'd heard the timeline. September 30, the attack, 66 stab wounds, the disposal before dawn. The judge spoke with measured clarity. The defendant is found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent. Sentenced to 56 years to life in state prison. 56 years to life. The words hung in the air, solid, final, but not triumphant. Accountability had been delivered. Justice, in its legal form, had been achieved. But it brought Omar back to no one. The judge looked toward the gallery. Does the victim's family wish to address the court? Alicia stood. She walked to the podium, her hands steady, her voice prepared. She had written what she would say, rehearsed the words until they felt both true and bearable. But in the moment before she spoke, she wasn't thinking about Timothy Cook at all. She was thinking about her children, what she'd had to tell them when their uncle disappeared, when the search ended, when the arrest came. She was thinking about her mother, who had lost a son and watched her daughter refuse to stop searching. She opened with the hardest truth. Giving the news to my kids was one of the most difficult things I have ever had to do. The weight in her voice wasn't bitterness. It wasn't rage. It was the acknowledgement of what had been required to carry grief and determination at the same time. To tell children something no one should have to explain. She spoke of Omar, not as a victim defined by his death, but as a brother who had shaped who she was. My brother would encourage me to not give up and to strive for better. That refusal to give up the receipts she'd gathered, the questions she'd asked, the insistence that something was wrong when others told her to wait, had led to this moment. Omar's words had carried her through the search, and they carried her through the statement. Then she spoke of what had been stolen. Not just a life, but a future. He wanted to have a wife, and he wanted to have kids. Now that has been taken away. A future that would never unfold. Milestones that would never arrive. A family Omar would never build. The courtroom heard not just the loss of what was, but the loss of what would have been. When Alicia finished, she returned to her seat. Timothy Cook sat motionless, facing forward. The man who had stripped a room to bare studs, who had posted from a dead man's phone, who had attended a vigil with a straight face, he had no words. 56 years to life. For Alicia, it was accountability, not an ending. Omar's life had been cut short. But what Alicia fought for, the truth, the refusal to give up, would outlast the man who took him. Years later, the case would close with one final reflection. Years later, the case would close with one final reflection. Alicia still hears Omar's voice sometimes, not in memory exactly, but in the pull of certain moments. When she wants to give up on something difficult, when grief settles too heavily, his words return then, clear as if he were standing beside her. Never give up. She wonders if he knew, somehow, that she never would. In the years since Timothy Cook's sentencing, Alicia has made a conscious choice not to let hatred consume her. The horror of what happened, the 66 stab wounds, the barrel, the deception, the vigil attended while hiding a body, could have destroyed her from the inside. Rage like that doesn't hurt the person it's aimed at. It eats the person carrying it. So she chose differently. Not forgiveness that was never required, but a refusal to let Cook take anything more than he already had. He'd taken Omar's life. He wouldn't take hers too. Omar had always told her to strive for better, to never give up. Those were the last words he'd said to her before September 30, before everything changed. And in the weeks that followed, when she was told to wait, to trust the process, those words kept her moving. The receipts she gathered, the questions she asked, the refusal to stop when others suggested stepping back. Omar never got to see how fiercely she'd fight for him. But she likes to think he knew she would. Her children are older now. They ask about their uncle sometimes, the man in the photos, the one whose name they know but whose voice they'll never hear. Alicia tells them what. She remembers his humor, his encouragement, the way he showed up for family. She tells them about the life he wanted, a wife, children of his own, a future stolen from him. How do you measure a life? Not in years stolen, but in the people who refuse to let that life be forgotten. There are things Alicia will never know. The case is closed. The evidence documented, the verdict final. But there's a gap in the timeline no investigation can fill, the exact moments before the first wound, what was said, what was thought. Whether Omar knew what was about to happen, that gap will remain forever. Some questions don't have answers, even when justice is served. But here's what is known. Timothy Cook planned everything. He attacked Omar when he returned home. He stripped the room to bare studs, bleached every surface, dumped the body before dawn. He drove Omar's car, posted from his phone, attended his vigil. He thought of everything, except one detail. The ankle tattoo visible on body camera footage when police came to the gutted room. Caught on gas station tapes after the barrel disposal was the thread that unraveled the cover-up. Cook had been meticulous, calculating. He'd erased every trace of the crime scene. But he couldn't erase himself. He wiped the room clean of every trace of Omar. But the one thing he could never wipe clean was his own skin. Omar Medina's life ended in violence and deception. But his memory lives on through the sister who refused to let his story be erased. This true crime case is a testament to what happens when love refuses to be silenced. Alicia could have waited, trusted the process, stepped back when others suggested it was time to grieve quietly. Instead, she gathered evidence, asked questions, and followed her instincts during the investigation. Her determination didn't bring Omar back, nothing ever could. but it ensured justice was served, that the truth would surface, and that Omar's name would be spoken with love rather than mystery. The lesson from this murder case isn't just about persistence. It's about refusing to accept easy answers when the truth demands more. It's about trusting your instincts when something doesn't add up in an investigation. Timothy Cook thought he'd planned everything perfectly. The cleanup, the deception, the vigil performance. But the one detail he couldn't erase became the thread that brought justice. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Comments are deeply valued. Drop a line below sharing your thoughts, or simply leave a word to show you were here. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to Omar's story with respect and attention. This case is based on real events. While some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling, the core facts, names, and outcome are documented and true. Our deepest respect goes to Omar Medina's family and all those who loved him.